What's up guys, this is Cinema Crossover. I'm back with a new episode of What If Naruto Was the Red Flash Part 37, and if you did enjoy the video, please consider a like, and if you're new to my channel and like more content, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more crossover fictions. Now let's begin this new video.
Meereen Naruto stayed in Meereen for about a fortnight and continued to be beneficial. Daenerys' transformation in city structure and rule was gradual, but it was a step in the right direction. Already, news had gone around the city about some alterations taking place and a peculiar figure seen around. He began with a river outside of town that was brown due to local clay and copper concentrations in the ground. That made sense because he'd heard Meereen used to produce and mine copper in its early days. Their usage of copper was basically confined to early weaponry and jewelry, but fortunately Naruto was from the future and knew a lot more about using copper than they did. He was working in a city smith shop, paying the proprietor a gold coin to borrow his facilities while developing some early bronze alloy prototypes. He discovered other nearby mineral resources and marked them for future reference. Copper was a good material because it could conduct heat and cool air, so he used it in the greenhouses that were being built throughout the city. However, combining copper with other metal ores produced alloys, which had numerous applications. Daenerys and her companions entered the smith shop to find Naruto hard at work at the furnace. Due to the heat, he had stripped down to his underwear and shoes, leaving him shirtless. This allowed them to have a good look at his physique, which was rather spectacular. Toned, well-built, and sporting an 8-pack. Daenerys was not a superficial person, but she had to admit that he was a very gorgeous man when she saw him. "Your Grace, thank you for coming. I've got some things I think you'll like," Naruto said as he approached carrying a small booklet he had authored. "I've already started building some water wheels by the river, and I've taken you to some nearby copper deposits to show you some of my inventions." "You're quite resourceful," Esser Baristan said as Naruto approached with a tiny sheet of copper alloy metal in his hand. "It's my job. Some things for your consideration, Your Grace. Putting these new copper alloy sheets on the sides of your ships will increase resistance and strength. This copper alloy doesn't corrode in seawater like wood does, and marine life doesn't stick to it," he explained. "This is used by the ships where I come from to protect their hulls and keep them from falling apart too quickly." "Interesting," Daenerys said as she examined the sheet of metal before flipping through the pamphlet. "You've kept yourself busy." "I did promise to help, and I keep my promises, and with your permission, I'd like to lead a party into the nearby hills. When I was collecting copper and clay, I found telltale signs of other nearby gem deposits." Naruto brought over a small sack and pulled out a rock of turquoise and then a small clump of iron ore. Daenerys inquired, "Where did they come from?" "The only way stones or iron ore end up at the bottom of rivers or streams is if there's a larger deposit or cavern nearby. I imagine the masters didn't bother exploring the surrounding hills too much when they started engaging in slavery, but there are definitely gem deposits nearby or, at the very least, iron. That alone could help this city and give a lot of people work, money, and not to mention a good distraction," he proposed. "Something like that could definitely be of great assistance to Meereen. You'll take a team with you tomorrow. Dario and some Unsullied will accompany you as protection," Daenerys instructed. Dario was going to say something, but she lifted her hand to stop him before he could. "That is an order." "Your Grace, yes," Dario said. "Bring your hiking shoes tomorrow, Dario," Naruto joked before continuing his work. Dario only stared at Naruto as they walked away, and Esser Baristan chuckled. The following day, Naruto led the construction crew up the Skeazoden River outside of Meereen and into the adjacent hills. They were carrying shovels, with Dario and the Unsullied nearby for safety and to keep an eye on them. Naruto stayed near the riverbed since it had the best possibility of discovering a nearby gem or metal discovery. The river turned brown due of clay and iron deposits, but if he found the iron in that jewel, there had to be others around. He only had to find them. He was wearing goggles and utilizing their scanner to see what he couldn't see with his own eyes. They scanned the riverbed and topsoil layer before moving on to the surrounding hills and the rocky plateaus of the Kaisei Pass. They'd been looking for an hour and were approximately a kilometer from the city walls. Naruto told everyone to take a break while he continued his quest, so everyone sat around the river while he looked around. Dario was becoming irritated by this and felt this may be the ideal method to get rid of him. He took one of the pickaxes and walked over slowly. When Naruto spun around before he could swing down, he held it up and brought it over his head. "Oh, thank you. I was going to ask for that." Naruto grabbed the pickaxe from him and moved away from the river to the rocky wall of the pass they were in before beginning to chip away at the sedimentary walls. Everyone spotted Naruto starting to work and waited to see if he had discovered anything. What began as methodical slow swing after swing quickly accelerated, and before long he was a rapid-moving blur chipping away at the walls of the rocky pass like a jackhammer. It astounded the workers who had just witnessed Naruto's speed for the first time. He was completing in minutes what numerous teams of employees would have taken days to complete. He came to a halt after roughly 5 minutes of chipping away at the sedimentary rock layer and fanned the dust out of his face. Take a look. Dario and the others went over to investigate, and they saw big blue-colored veins streaming through rocks within the giant hole Naruto cut away in the rocky pass. He had discovered and broken his way into a sapphire gem deposit. "All right. I'll admit, this is impressive," Dario said. "And this is just the beginning. I've got more to find," Naruto said, picking up the pickaxe and beginning to carve out more entries into surrounding gem deposits and veins. Daenerys learned that Naruto's little river adventure had been successful. He uncovered and dug out openings to sapphire and ruby veins, silver deposits, iron deposits, and, finally, gold deposits. Suffice it to say, there would be a lot of effort and capital for Meereen City and inhabitants. Naruto met with Daenerys in the council chamber to describe the location of the deposits and other details. "So, all the deposits and gem veins are along the riverbed here. Just follow it up and you'll find them. The close proximity to the river will make the work much faster," he added, pointing to a map. "Grey Worm," she said, "I want a group of Unsullied to guard these locations at all times." He said, "Yes, Your Grace." Esser Barristan inquired, "How much do you wager is down there?" "More than enough," Naruto replied. "The veins run deep in the ground, so you've got your work cut out for you." "You've helped us yet again, and I can't thank you enough for that," Daenerys said, and Naruto grinned and nodded. "Like I said, that definitely provides this city with money and work. All that remains is to help the people adjust to the change and stop the Sons of the Harpy." "I take it things have been quiet," Naruto stated, nodding. "They're just waiting for the right moment to strike, but before they do, we should take care of a few things. First and foremost, we should make sure you dragons kept below don't starve or have your growth stunted." "Do you know how I can help my dragons?" she inquired. "Maybe. If my hunch is correct, I might be able to help you help them and get back on the same page," he questioned, and she hesitated for a second before responding. "Even with my speed, I'm not as fireproof as you are, so if you continue to doubt my desire to help you and I'm really bad, they'll just kill me." "He makes a valid point," Dario said. It was a rare occurrence for him to agree with Naruto, but it was more to the point that he expected the dragons to kill him. "If I can get them to calm down," he offered, "I might be able to help you reconnect with them." "How can you be so sure?" Daenerys inquired. "Do they have dragons where you come from?" "No, but I'm good with animals, and I'm good at getting people to trust me. It's worked with you so far," he said, and she smirked. "From what I've heard, dragons are extraordinary creatures. According to the Grand Maesters in Westeros, many believe that dragons are as smart as people, if not smarter in some cases, so I imagine what Drogon went through isn't too dissimilar to what children often experience when they reach a certain age."
"What's that?" Missandei inquired. "I'm not sure what the dragon equivalent would be, but in human terms, it's adolescence. The stage of life when you transition from a child to a young adult," he explained, and they began to grasp. "Your body, mind, and sometimes behavior are changing. Some of the changes include, but are not limited to, aggression, mood swings, confusion, fear, and not knowing why. I'm sure everyone here understands what I'm talking about."
Esser Barristan reminded him, "These are dragons, not children." "True, but it's the best comparison I have. Plus, if dragons are incredibly intelligent and have such a long life cycle, some form of emotional development has to be considered as to Drogon's behavioral chances," Naruto explained. "I understand this is strange thinking, but I believe it is the reason, and when Drogon returns, Daenerys can restore her bond, but she should start with Rhaegal and Viserion here. At the very least, I believe I can calm them down so you can talk to them again." Daenerys deliberated for a moment. She strolled up to the balcony and stared out over the city and the Slaver's Bay horizon to mull it over. Dario was the one who told her she was the mother of dragons, but one was missing and 2 were imprisoned. She went to meet them later that night, only to be met with an angry response. It hurt her to lock them up, but it was necessary to prevent another incident like the one with Drogon. "If something goes wrong down there, I swear on my life that I can get you out before you get hurt," Naruto swore. She could see he meant it when she looked at him. She looked over to Missandei, who was unsure, as was Esser Barristan. This was a hazardous decision, but she decided to go forward with it. I'll take you and show you to them. He nodded, and they were led down to the pyramid's basement, where Viserion and Rhaegal were held. The Unsullied shifted the massive stone door to the side, revealing the empty black basement where the dragons were imprisoned. Naruto kissed his flash ring for good luck before entering the dungeon with a torch. Daenerys arrived with her own torch, followed by Esser Barristan, Dario, Missandei, and Grey Worm with some Unsullied. Naruto came to a halt at the bottom of the stairs, causing them to come to a halt as well. Wait here. If things look bad, then run, he said as he took a few steps forward and held up the torch high for light. Season 5's dragon sequences were limited, but equally magnificent and horrifying. Never in his wildest dreams did he see himself in a dungeon with 2 dragons, lying to himself that he wasn't terrified. He could hear some chains rattling, indicating that they had picked up on his scent. It was just a matter of time until they struck. Are there any dragons in here? If so, I'm not here to hurt you. And I'm not here to eat you. When he heard more chain rattling in front of him, his flame illuminated the pale scales of a dragon. Rhaegal lunged forward and chomped on him at that point. Naruto recoiled in terror, his trousers damp, and hurried back to his feet as Rhaegal and Viserion hissed and roared at him. Viserion was a creamy white with gold markings, whereas Rhaegal was green with bronze markings. The 2 dragons charged forward and bit him like rabid wolves, forcing Esser Barristan and the others to grab Daenerys and take her back up the stairs. Naruto, she yelled, attempting to persuade him to leave, but he refused. Before staring at their new arrival, the 2 dragons raised their heads and let out streams of fire. Naruto kept his ground and refused to flee, even though he was terrified. Dario whispered, "He's as good as dead." The 2 dragons glanced at Naruto, and he returned their gaze. They snarled and growled at him, but he attempted to remain calm. They approached him gently as he carefully placed his torch down and raised his hands while maintaining eye contact with them. "Easy boys, I'm not here to hurt you," he stated calmly. He didn't flee as the 2 dragons hissed and chomped at him. "I'm not sure if you can really understand me, but maesters say you're as smart as people. So if you can understand me, know that I'm not here to hurt you, but to help you." The dragons followed him as he moved slowly onward. "I've seen a lot of incredible things since I got my powers, but I never thought this would be one of them," he explained as he moved his hand closer to Rhaegal. The dragon hissed and snarled at him, but Naruto remained calm. Naruto closed his eyes and started channeling some of the speed force around his body. Instead of channeling a large amount of lightning to throw a lightning bolt, he just produced a few flickers to attract their attention. He was exuding pure energy, which could be sensed in the air. Unbeknownst to him, the energy he exuded formed a peaceful and soothing aura since he was calm and collected at the time. He still didn't understand the speed force or his link to it, but it frequently represented his emotional state. Because he was calm, his speed force aura was visible to the dragons. "I'm here to help you. I know dragon puberty is aggravating. But your mother didn't do this to harm you." In answer, Viserion and Rhaegal snarled. They didn't believe him if they understood him. It's true. She was scared after what Drogon did. Fear is natural. It's a part of life. I'm sure even dragons feel fear, he said as the dragons stayed on guard but became less hostile. "Daenerys, if you want to talk to them, now might be a good time. I've calmed them down a little." Daenerys wasn't sure what compelled her to proceed. Whether she believed Naruto or just wanted to save her children, she stepped forward despite Esser Barristan and Dario's attempts to stop her. When she got close enough and the dragons could see her and the torch, they became aggressive once more. "Easy, easy," Naruto said, producing more lightning that caused them to stop. "She's come to see you too, Daenerys?" "I am," she said as she walked forward slowly. She set down the flame and approached Viserion, who hissed at her. "Keep talking to them. I believe they understand us, so just speak from the heart," he said quietly, and she nodded. "People said I should have given up on you, but a mother never gives up on her children. She may have to discipline them if necessary, but she never gives up on them," she added as the dragons snarled. Naruto hushed, more empathy. "I'm sorry. I was afraid," she acknowledged, her heart full of love, anguish, and pain for them. "I didn't want another child's corpse brought to me after Drogon. After your brother killed that child, so I thought it would be better if you two were kept down here. I'm so sorry." She approached Viserion, who continued to growl at her before turning his head. Daenerys approached and put her hand on his side. Viserion relaxed and smiled as she ran her palm along his scales. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Naruto approached, cautiously reaching out his hand to the enormous shackle around Viserion's neck. He grasped the screw and yanked it out, allowing the shackle to fall to the ground.
Viserion grumbled and shook his body, relieved that the collar had come off. Naruto whirled around to see Rhaegal hissing at him before lowering his head and angling it so the collar faced him. Daenerys nodded as Naruto said, "Together." The two strolled over to Rhaegal's shackle and unscrewed the screw, causing it to fall off. The two dragons felt more at peace and began heading back into the dungeon's darkness.
Naruto and Daenerys hurriedly grabbed up their torches and returned to the stairs, where Esir Barristan, Missandei, and Dario looked in disbelief. Esir Barristan noticed Naruto's hands trembling as he handed him the torch. "You all right, lad?" inquired the older knight. "Fine. Just fine," Naruto told him as he grabbed his canteen and attempted to take a sip of water, but his fingers shook so terribly that he spilled the water all over his face and shirt. "Excuse me, but I need to go to the bathroom." Naruto carefully proceeded up the stairs to the restroom, where he either pissed, spit, or puked his guts out. Most likely a combo of all three. Before closing the dungeon entrance and leaving, the Unsullied carried in some sheep and goat flesh for the dragons to devour. Naruto ultimately approached Daenerys and the others in the council room, still shaken but feeling better. "You feeling better?" Esir Barristan inquired. "One moment," Naruto said, grabbing the pitcher of wine on the table and draining the entire contents as quickly as he could. There were some puzzled looks as he swiftly drained the pitcher of wine before returning it to the table, wiping his lips and cracking his neck. "I'm fine. I puked my guts out and wish I could get drunk, but I'm fine." "I take it the experience was not what you expected," Daenerys remarked. "No, it wasn't. I was terrified and thrilled all at once," he said. "However, they didn't eat me, and I believe they're doing better, so..." Add another one to the win column. "I'm more surprised that they didn't kill you right away because they're dragons," Dario said. "How in the hell did you get them to trust you?" "When I find out," Naruto said, "I'll tell you. I believe the Maesters of Westeros were correct. They are animals, but they are smart animals, smart enough to distinguish a threat from someone who only wanted to help." "But do you think unchaining them was a good idea?" Daenerys said. "I do. Dragons don't do well in captivity. Your ancestors did it, and it stunted their growth and strength. They're still in the dungeon down below, and your relationship with them is better, but I'd still advise you to see them as much as possible," he said, and she agreed. "Hopefully, when you see Drogon again, he'll have calmed down and come back home." "Do you really think so?" she inquired. "I do. They say dragons and their riders have a special bond. He'll be back," he said. "Thank you, Naruto. You put your life in danger to help me with my children. You didn't have to do that," Daenerys remarked. "I know, and I'm probably going to say it again. But I wanted to help. That's just who I am. Someone who is happy to help those in need," he replied with his typical grin. Dario's frown returned when he saw her smile return. This Naruto character was getting on his nerves. "I think that's enough for today. After what just happened, I'm going to take a nice, relaxing bath before going to bed. I have some plans for tomorrow." "What kinds of plans?" Esir Barristan inquired. "I'd like to do some exploring and hopefully cross something off my bucket list," he replied. "What's a bucket list?" Missandei inquired. XXXXX line break. Naruto dashed away from Meereen, heading in the general direction of his destination. He came to a halt in the dirt and sand after about 10 minutes of running and took a deep breath. When he gazed about at his surroundings, he felt his skin crawl. Perhaps Esir Barristan was right about that curse because something about this place feels sick, Naruto thought to himself, his surroundings overwhelming him with dread he hadn't felt in a long time, if ever. Before activating his gauntlets and preparing ready for anything, he kissed his flash ring for good luck. "Alright, let's see how Westeros' most advanced civilization lived." Valyria and Esso's Naruto began his journey through Old Valyria, guiding himself with his eyes and the sensor in his gauntlet. He didn't believe in superstitions or ghosts prior to being struck by lightning, but what happened after is another story. He was becoming a believer after what he had done, especially after his journey with Sam and Dean, and now this. The spooky silence, scary mist, and dark clouds overhead just contributed to the cold factor. "I'm hoping that the stone men are the only thing I have to deal with, and that Tyrion was joking about flaming demons," he mumbled, hitting a button on his gauntlet, which lighted up the palm base like a flashlight. He hopped over a broken stone bridge and made his way through the old building ruins. He noticed crumbling archways and more ruins from a once great metropolis. It was like visiting Pompeii or going around the Colosseum and Roman Forum sans the crowds of visitors. You could sense the place's history, and the horrors that led to its demise. He entered what appeared to be a room, judging by the destroyed remains of walls, and noticed what appeared to be a forge in the corner, where he might be able to get some Valyrian steel ore. Gideon, scan the area. Naruto clicked a button and fired a scanning ray from his gauntlet across the entire room. Any traces of metal ores? Only bronze, silver, and gold alloys. I'm not detecting any other alloys in this room, she said. Must have been the jeweler's room, Naruto said as he crouched beside a surprisingly well-preserved clay pot on the ground. When he carefully opened the top, he discovered it was filled with gold. He checked the other clay pots and discovered that they were loaded with silver and gold. As a wise man, he grouped them all together and utilized his PIM particle shrink ray to shrink them down before putting them in his bag. He didn't require the gold, so he gave it to Daenerys and Meereen. You can't dominate a city or affect change unless you have money, and additional money never hurts. Outside, Naruto heard some rustling, which immediately alerted him. He moved slowly and carefully out of the room and continued strolling through the ruins, fully aware that the stone men were most likely monitoring him. He kept going till he came to a halt in the remains of a great hall. He scanned the area but found nothing, so he kept his scanner turned on while walking through the rest of the facility. It was eerie walking down the ruined corridors of what used to be a castle or tower. It's like a scene from a horror film where the protagonist is walking down a corridor of a haunted ruin when it suddenly comes alive and he sees ghosts. He entered another room and inspected the area for skeletons and what appeared to be a massive furnace, which gave him hope that it was a forge. That caused him to scan the entire area from top to bottom in the hopes of finding some Valyrian steel fragments to create his blade, and when the scan light passed over a large boulder, his gauntlet beeped. Naruto, I've picked up traces of a metal ore I don't have in my database, Gideon informed him, so he walked over to investigate. It was roughly the size of a basketball, with jagged edges, irregular sides, and natural formation indents, thus it wasn't constructed. He took up the rock and saw the soot on his hands, so he placed it back down and fanned his palm at high speed to blow away all the soot. What was originally assumed to be a rock was actually a soot-covered mineral. It was a black-grayish ore that resembled Bloom steel ore, and he could see the glossy surface of what would eventually become steel after being refined in a furnace. This procedure removed any surplus sand, debris, or carbon that would not be incorporated into the steel. It didn't appear to be any different from regular steel ore. He scanned the ore again and displayed the holographic scans and data on his gauntlet. That allowed him to see the metal's properties, and his initial readings suggested that it didn't appear to be any different than conventional steel, which is when he discovered something strange about its atomic structure. Gideon, increase the view by 1000 and give me the atomic structure outline of the metal. She followed his instructions and projected the data from his gauntlet. It allowed him to see what made it unique. The raw steel ore, for example, has an extremely thick nanowire and nanotube-like structure deep at an atomic level, which is possibly one of the factors that developed this metal into such sharp and unbreakable weapons. It was similar to the structure seen in fabled Damascus steel, which was an influence for Valyrian steel. Damascus steel was known for its toughness, resistance to fracturing, and ability to retain an honed edge. The art of manufacturing it has been lost to history, but research has proven that its unique structure is the reason for its high grade and tenacity, as was the case with Valyrian steel ore. After being refined to remove all impurities and forged, the metal acquired an inner atomic structure that made it incredibly resistant while being light and not indestructible. That's probably where its second peculiarity, the metal's energy qualities, came into play. The metal was not inert, and it emitted a distinct low-level radiation that he had never seen before. The radiation was innocuous, yet it possessed unusual qualities. If Gideon's readings were correct, this was the reason why Valyrian steel was so unique. This metal isn't chemically inert, its endothermic properties are active despite the metal's state, Naruto explained. Gideon, run some calculations on possible results of finished metal forging. One moment, Gideon said as she ran the numbers. From what I've observed, the metal's endothermic properties absorb energy, and if forged under the right conditions and additional factors are added, then its energy properties are distributed throughout the entirety of the finished product, giving the finished weapon a unique energy signature that keeps the blade sharp and in prime condition.
Valyrian steel weapons were forged with magic and dragon fire. I might be able to get the dragon fire, but I doubt I'll be able to get the magic, Naruto noted. Gideon, what if I forged a weapon with the ore but did not include another factoring element like magic?
The blade you forge would be incredibly sharp and powerful, but my scans show that without another factor or element introduced into the forging process and combined with the Valyrian steel ore, it would be no different than a titanium or Damascus steel blade. Powerful but not impervious to damage, Gideon explained. Well, that stinks. So, what can compensate for magic? Naruto came to a halt when he realized that he possessed something that the rest of the world lacked. He reached inside his backpack and pulled out the shrunken duffel bag before shrinking it back to normal size using his shrink ray. He reached inside and extracted a cylindrical cylinder containing a vibranium core. Gideon, scan the vibranium to see if it would be a viable replacement. Gideon made several calculations while scanning the vibranium core, considering its unique features.
She then ran it through some simulations with Valyrian ore, taking into account all factors and procedures until she found one that might provide Naruto what he desired.
According to a simulation I ran, if the vibranium is used in conjunction with the Valyrian steel ore and both metals are refined, all excess elements are removed, and a sufficient enough heat is maintained on both, it could result in the blade you're looking for. Again, this is a calculated risk, but if the forging process is done correctly, the Valyrian steel ore's energy properties would absorb the unique energy properties of the vibranium and in theory could. Better than a 0% chance, and what's life without a little risk? Naruto shrunk everything back down and quickly left Old Valyria, returning to Meereen to begin construction on his own blade. He started thinking about what kind of sword he wanted to construct while running. He wasn't a sword guy, but he couldn't carry about a large spear, so sword it was. But he didn't want just another Western-style sword. The more he thought about it, the more he knew that this sword would be more than just a souvenir for his stay here. If previous conflicts in the show's history are any indication, having a sword was a necessary. There would be no police to arrest anyone, and he would be the only one fighting without the intention of killing. Naruto has changed a lot since gaining his abilities. He began like Barry, but as time passed, he began to accept a darker aspect of his character that he had come to terms with. He could confess to himself that he was a hero with Oliver and Jiraiya training him and being significant influencers in that side of his life, but he wasn't the clean-cut tights-wearing embodiment of truth, justice, and pure goodness that Barry could be. He was in the center, fighting for what is right and desiring to do good, yet willing to accept reality and embrace a more morally murky area of heroism. Oliver used to be a murderer, but he promised himself that he would be better, and even then, he wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and Naruto knew he had to do the same. Naruto had no idea what his future held if he faced the surviving Akatsuki, but he wasn't naive enough to believe he could get through it by simply imprisoning them. After defeating Orochimaru and regaining his inner peace, he vowed to himself that he would never kill again in fury, rage, or personal vengeance. Even then, he would never do it unless there was no other option. I'm not sure how the others would respond to such declaration, but that's another story. With all of this in mind, he came up with the exact design for the sword he intended to make. And it was inspired by an anime he grew up watching, Rurouni Kenshin. He was going to make the Sakabut. The Sakabut, or reverse blade sword, is similar to a katana, but the blade is fashioned so that the usual cutting edge is dull and hard, while the flat back has a sharpened edge. Instead of slicing and cutting, the sword now deals blunt force damage. It'd be like smacking someone with a light metal baseball bat that sounds both fantastic and amusing at the same time. He could defend himself and not risk inadvertently murdering someone with it. And because it was made of vibranium, he was confident he could block anything with it. He reappeared in his marine chamber, where he began writing things down on some paper. He'd need some forging tools if he was going to construct this weapon. He could pay one of the city's smiths to borrow his tools, but a standard fire wouldn't be enough to generate the heat required to melt the Valyrian steel ore and the vibranium. He'd need dragons to do it. So he approached Daenerys and sought her permission. "I'm sorry, but do you want to use my dragons to forge your sword?" she inquired. He responded, "Pretty much. Your dragons are probably the only way I'll be able to generate enough heat to melt the Valyrian steel ore I found and make my sword." Esser Barristan inquired, "Wait, so you actually found some when you went to Valyria?" Naruto nodded. "You know that was extremely dangerous, right?" "I know, but I wasn't touched by a stoneman, and I got what I needed before they could attack me. Plus I got some more gold and silver for your vaults as a bonus, he replied. I know this is an unusual request, but I'd like to bring my forging tools down to the dungeon and use Rhaegal and Viserion. Well, it's not really up to me, it's up to them whether or not they'll help you, she explained. Do you really believe you can make something? He said, I'm hoping to try. I think I can get everything else I need, but I might need some help as well. Nothing too serious, just someone to lend a helping hand. One of your Unsullied who understands what I'm saying would be fine. Alright, I'm curious to see if your idea works, Daenerys said, and Naruto smiled. He bowed his head and said, Thank you, Your Grace. The following day, Naruto was in the dungeons with some Unsullied, who were assisting him in bringing in what he need. He swiftly set up his workstation a few meters away from the steps and lit up a slew of torches for illumination because he would need it. He collected everything and then used his extraordinary speed to quickly construct a large stone furnace, forge out of all the wood and charcoal he had. If the Unsullied required more wood or charcoal, he would bring it in. He removed his jacket and set it aside, along with everything else, before unshrinking the ores he would be utilizing. Naruto and Daenerys entered the dungeon with a torch and witnessed the dragons devouring the meat from multiple sheep carcasses. When the dragons noticed them, they immediately stood up and walked over. They weren't roaring like they used to, which was a positive sign. Daenerys approached Rhaegal and petted him on the side. Hello, Viserion, Rhaegal. I was hoping for your assistance, he said as the dragons just stared at him. Esser Barristan and the rest waited by the stairs until they saw Daenerys and Naruto return with the dragons. Daenerys pointed to the forge and said, Dracarys. The two dragons snarled and fired two streams of fierce fire, igniting the wood and charcoal with a fire so hot that Naruto had to back away from it. The forge instantly reached a temperature of almost 2000 degrees Fahrenheit. That was the standard temperature for forging steel, but because he was working with both Valyrian steel and vibranium, he would need it to become hotter. Best of luck, Naruto, she said as Naruto grabbed a piece of fabric and tied it around his brow, much like a Japanese smith would do. Thank you. I'm going to need it, he said, putting on his goggles and getting to work. He was well organized, had everything he required, and had Gideon on his side to assist him. The Unsullied stood guard at the steps, and those who spoke common tongue would assist him if he needed it. The first thing he needed to do was consolidate the metal he'd be using, which he had to do twice because he'd be utilizing two distinct metals. Traditionally, Tamahagane steel, also known as jewel steel or bloom steel, was utilized in Japanese sword manufacture. He had Valyrian steel and vibranium instead of Tamahagane. The smith had to first purify the ore he was going to use. So Naruto took a hammer and chisel and began carving off smaller bits of Valyrian steel ore to facilitate the consolidation process. Because the Valyrian steel ore contained impurities such as slag, sand, and particles of charcoal from the smelting process, he placed them in the furnace to heat them up. Once it was heated enough, the dirt, slag, and other impurities would melt away, allowing him to consolidate what steel remained. Gideon walked him through the do's and don'ts of everything. He hadn't even begun to melt the Valyrian steel ore. He was simply attempting to make it as pure as possible. Daenerys and the others stood around for a while before departing. Right now, not much was going to happen. Making this sword would most likely take a few days and a team of smiths. Fortunately, Naruto's extraordinary speed meant he didn't require a crew. He continued the purification process for several hours, ensuring that all of the Valyrian steel ore he would utilize was pure. The Unsullied, like the dragons, were intrigued. It's almost like a show. Fortunately, the vibranium core he possessed was 100% pure and maintained in an airtight container, so he didn't need to cleanse it. This made things a little simpler. Gideon told him that he would utilize Valyrian steel for the Shingane, which was the low cardan steel used as the sword's heart, and vibranium for the Kawagan, or the sword's flesh. He mounted the vibranium on a long metal pole and covered it with wet paper, clay, and straw. This was a classic Japanese technique in which the clay held everything together while preventing oxygen from decarburizing the steel. He initially placed it in the furnace to heat it up. He was well aware that the furnace temperature alone would not be sufficient to melt the vibranium ore, but this was just the beginning. Naruto took a step back before looking at the dragons after Gideon advised him that it needed more heat. Dracarys, he yelled, and the dragons didn't respond for a second before Viserion unleashed a torrent of fire at the furnace, which was so hot he had to back away. He kept a tight eye on the vibranium with his goggles and saw it begin to melt from the tremendous heat, which was a good thing. He removed it from the furnace with the pole once it had softened and placed it on an anvil. He had one of the Unsullied wield a flatter, which was essentially a flat-surfaced implement that spread force across a larger surface area. Naruto then took a hammer and lightly pounded the flatter to help it hold together. He couldn't push the metal and had to rely on it to guide him. Despite his superhuman speed, he couldn't rush this. After he had sufficiently cemented it, he added additional clay and returned it to the fire to heat it up again before having Viserion apply more heat. He put more wood and charcoal to the furnace to keep the temperature up before removing the vibranium and reconsolidating it. Heat and hammer were used for another hour before the vibranium was sufficiently cemented to move on to the next step. Folding was necessary for the Valyrian steel as well. A day later, the process of heating and folding steel is also known as kati. This method makes use of the carbon diffusion phenomenon. Carbon finally evens out as it goes through each layer, producing a homogeneous billet that may be drawn out into a blade. He had Viserion superheat the vibranium before enlisting the assistance of an Unsullied for the cutting and folding. He held a cutter to the steel, and the Unsullied smashed through it with a hammer. He'd fold the heated metal in half, then fold it on top of itself to form a solid layer. Then reheat it till it was all one piece, then cut and fold it again. Then repeat the process, switching between vertical and horizontal cutting as needed. The folding process was tedious, but it was necessary to increase the strength of the blade and remove any impurities that may have accumulated during the forging process. Gideon made him cut and fold the blade dozens of times to get it just perfect. If you thought it was excessive, consider that he had to do the same for Valyrian steel ore. There was a lot of repetition, but it was required for his sword. He managed to get the Valyrian steel consolidated enough for the following step with the help of the dragons in melting it, and after several hundred cuts and folds. The following day, Naruto had progressed to the Tsukurikomi stage of sword manufacture, often known as forging the stock. He widened the vibranium steel with the help of one of the Unsullied, using hammers in the flatter, so that the Valyrian steel core could be inserted. Throughout the procedure, he had to ensure that both metals were regularly reheated to the high temperature generated by dragonfire. He folded the vibranium steel to construct a jacket, then placed the Valyrian steel core in the center and slammed it shut around it. The Valyrian steel was now encased by vibranium, and once hammered close, he threw it into the furnace. Viserion blasted it with more dragonfire, essentially melting the two pieces together and forming the billet of the blade. The Shingane and Kawagon have merged. Sonobe, or stretching out the steel billet, was the following step. He stretched out the small billet of mixed steel into a lengthy bar with a hammer and his extraordinary speed. Although it didn't appear to be much, the bar included almost 3 million layers of folded vibranium and Valyrian steel. He had to keep it constantly heated so it didn't harden too rapidly, which would make his task more difficult. He wouldn't be able to sharpen it like a regular katana with regular tools with the vibranium added, because it would practically deflect any form of sharpening tool once cooled. He had to keep the blade hot, even during the shaping and sharpening process, because once it was set, he couldn't change it. If he made a mistake and let it cool, he'd have to have the dragon superheat it to the highest temperature possible to undo his mistake. He'd prefer not take his time. He began the hizukuri, or blade shaping, after stretching it out to the desired size and hot cutting the tip of the blade. He used his gauntlets to shape and sharpen the blade because he was working with hot metal. He began by setting the back edge of the blade on the spine, then progressed to the back bevel. Before he could continue to the front of the blade and set in the curve, he had to define the middle ridge of the blade. It took a few hours since he had to keep the blade hot all the time before it set, but it also helped because shaping a hot blade was easier than shaping a cooled one. And his gauntlets and quickness allowed him to control the blade when other smiths couldn't. He could start filing with a hardened steel scraper to improve the blade shape once he had all of the geometries determined. He was able to accomplish it swiftly and cleanly with his super speed before ensuring that the cutting edge was on the back of the blade. He prepared the clay for heat processing, also known as the Tsuchioki step, once he got the edges in proportions. This was the most crucial step in producing a Japanese blade, since it provided the blade with its unmistakable differential hardening line, or Hammond line, up the back of the blade. He imprinted the back of the blade with a thicker temper line of clay as it moved up. He placed it in the furnace to heat treat the blade in the clay, allowing as much clay to adhere to it as possible while the rest was burned away. He removed it from the charcoal and dipped it in oil to cool. The smoke that rose was the moment of truth as Naruto pulled out the sword to witness for himself what had taken 3 days to make. He took it up once it was cold enough to look at with his own eyes, and it was stunning. The distinctive Valyrian steel ripple design was there, along with a magnificent darkened Hammond line on the back. The blade itself was spotless, with not a single impurity in sight. The blade was about 32 inches long, barely short of a katana, but it was clean and flawless. Naruto inquired, "Gideon, how are we looking?" "You've done it, Naruto. Why don't you check it out for yourself?" she offered. Naruto raised the blade and swung it down on one of the furnace bricks, severing it in half. He examined the blade and found not a single scratch or scuff mark on it. Naruto told her, "She's a thing of beauty, Gideon. We did it." "Indeed, we did. I recommend getting some rest so you can finish building the pommel and scabbard tomorrow." "Fair enough," Naruto said as he wrapped up the day's work by polishing the blade and cleaning up. The following day, Naruto awoke the next morning to work on the rest of his sword after taking a bath and cleansing his clothes of smoke, charcoal, and ash. The dragons stood there casually devouring their animal carcasses while watching. Naruto sat on a stool, working on the remaining parts. To build the tsuba, or sword guard, he grabbed some sheets of iron and superheated them with his super speed, then cut off the excess and shaped out the shape. He used a saw and his super speed to carve out 2 D-shaped wedges in the tsuba after cleaning and polishing it. The beauty of this guard was found in its simplicity and craftsmanship. Then he started working on the habaki, which is a wedge-shaped metal collar intended to protect the sword from falling out of the scabbard. He fashioned it out of copper and attached it on the blade after adjusting its size. After that, he began working on the metal for the fuchi, which was the hilt collar between the sword's handguard and hilt, and the kashira, which was the butt cap. He fashioned them out of steel. This technique was time-consuming, but it taught him how valuable these swords were when they were created. He then started carving some wood to form the saya, or wooden sheath for the sword. Following that was the preparation of the handle's wrapping, and he was able to locate a dealer in the city who dealt with sharks and rays in order to obtain some authentic ray skin for the wrapping. He'd soaked it in water the night before and then cut out what he needed to wrap around the sword's grip. He let it remain for a night to dry and solidify its shape once it was set and wrapped. He chose to spend the time his sword was drying to manufacture the manuki, which were the ornaments placed on the handle to fit into the palm for grip. He carved 2 lightning bolts out of silver because that was his logo. He felt like a jeweler working with a hammer and chisel to perfect the detail. It was fantastic. The following day, he began the suka maki of the sword, which was the wrapping of the suka or handle, on the penultimate day. He wrapped the handle with leather and alternated it every now and then to prevent any wrapping from coming undone. While wrapping, he inserted the lightning bolt manuki beneath the wrap as instructed. He finished the scabbard after completing everything else and putting on the actual sword. He polished and sanded it before painting it black, but he decided to add texture and form by sprinkling on some red and white paint-colored charcoal dust. It gave it a distinct appearance and design, and while the paint and charcoal were still wet and fresh, he vibrated his fingers next to it to create lightning. His crimson and white lightning would strike the wet paint and charcoal, causing striations and lightning bolts to appear all over. It gave the impression that the red and white charcoal on the scabbard were lightning bolts. "If I do say so myself, this is great work," Naruto said to himself. "If science doesn't work out, I should get into craftsmanship." The following day, 6 days of hard effort, copper, steel, and a lot of wood and charcoal to fire a furnace were used to produce a weapon unlike any other this world had seen. Daenerys and her group were in the council chamber, going over some of the finer features in the city, despite the fact that construction on the gem deposits had already begun. It was a welcome distraction for the residents of this metropolis, and things appeared to be improving. When some Unsullied entered with Naruto, their quiet talk was cut short. He washed up, his clothing were clean, and he carried a sword with the handle over his right shoulder. "I'm sorry I've been occupied for the past 6 days, but making a sword is not easy," he explained. "Obviously, how many swords were you making?" Daenerys inquired. "Just one, but unlike any other," he said, taking his sword from his back and holding it forward. Esser Barristan walked over to investigate, and it wasn't like any blade he'd seen before. The design alone did not resemble a Westeros broadsword, an Essos short sword, or a Dothraki arak. "What kind of a sword is this?" "A katana, a sword used by my ancestors," he said. The scabbard was black with red and white charcoal lightning dispersed all about and a long leather strap to sling it onto Naruto's back. The handle's leather covers were black, and the handguard was a lovely, polished copper. Esser Barristan removed the sword from its scabbard to reveal a one-of-a-kind single-edge blade with a gorgeous, hardened darker-colored edge along the back. True to the reverse blade design, he could touch the front of the blade with his hand and it would not cut because the front of the blade had been blunted while the spine had been sharpened. But just because it was dull didn't mean it wasn't dangerous, for the Valyrian steel transformed it into something akin to swinging a hefty metal club with the pace of a sword. 1. Esser Barristan complimented him on his blade, saying, "This is a beautiful blade. I still can't believe you managed to forge something out of Valyrian steel." "Well, it's not the same as the great Valyrian steel swords in Westeros. That art is long gone, but I think I've done a good enough job in making my own version," he pointed out. Daario came up to see the blade for himself, and he had to admit that it was finely constructed. That's when he observed something that made him laugh out loud. "I'm sorry to tell you, but this blade is useless because the edge is on the wrong side," he said to Naruto. "I know. That was done on purpose," Naruto said, returning his sword to his scabbard. "It's a sakabit, which translates to reverse blade. The front edge is blunted for a reason." "Why?" Daario asked. "What good is a sword that can't kill?" "That's the point. I don't kill, so I designed a weapon that shares that philosophy, but it'll still hurt if you get hit by it," Naruto replied, only for Daario to giggle. "That's the biggest load of shit I've ever heard. A sword that doesn't kill. Ha!" Daario stepped over and poured himself a glass of wine. Esser Barristan reminded out, "He does have a point. More like a difference of opinion. I don't need to kill to stop my enemies. Trust me, this sword will prove its worth sooner or later," Naruto informed him. Daenerys replied, "We'll see about that. XXXXX line break." Meereen Daenerys was standing on the balcony, looking out over the vast metropolis of Meereen. The city was bustling with activity as workers worked on the freshly discovered gem veins and deposits, as well as building greenhouses around the city, laying new water pipelines for better access to clean water, and doing everything else Naruto suggested Daenerys do. Her council has grown to include more Meereen residents. Some were once nobles, while others had worked in various sectors of the city. Daenerys was upset, but Naruto was correct. If she wanted things to improve in Meereen, she required the assistance of locals. The new set of laws were proclaimed so that everyone was aware of what was going on, and while the emancipated slaves believed they were still above the law, the unsullied kept the peace. Nonetheless, all of the construction provided the city a much-needed distraction. She was just waiting for the Harpy's sons to strike again. Esser Barristan emerged from the house and joined her on the balcony. "Everyone looks happy enough from up here," she observed when Esser Barristan began to chuckle. "What?" "I was remembering all the times your brother forced me to accompany him down from the Red Keep into the streets of King's Landing," he explained. "Why?" "He liked to walk among the people and sing to them," he said. Daenerys grinned as she imagined what that must have been like. "He sang to them?" "Yes," Esser Barristan said as they walked back into the room. "Rhaegar would pick a spot on the Hook or the Streets of Seeds and then sing, just like all the other minstrels." "And what exactly did you do?" Daenerys inquired. "I made sure no one killed him, and I collected the money," he replied, which shocked Daenerys. "What? He liked to see how much money he could make." "He was good?" Daenerys questioned. "He was very good," Esser Barristan said, "but Viserys never told you." "He told me Rhaegar was good at killing people," she said as she sat down at the table. "Rhaegar never liked to kill. He preferred to sing," he informed her. "And what did you do with the money?" She was curious. "Well, once he gave it to the next minstrel down the street, once he gave it to an orphanage in Fleabottom, and once we got horribly drunk," he recalled, as the two chuckled. Daario entered the room after hearing, "Your Grace. Hisdar is here, waiting in the audience chamber." "How many others are there?" she inquired. 50. 100. He estimated. "Will you be joining us, Esser Barristan?" Daenerys inquired of her oathbearer. "I believe I can keep you safe from Hisdar zo Lorak," Daario promised her.
"I believe I can protect you from Hisdar zo Lorak," Daenerys said. Daario. "Where is Naruto?"
"No idea. He said he had something to do in town," he said, and she stared at Esser Barristan. "Esser Barristan, could you find him for me?" she inquired, to which the elderly knight nodded. "Go, Esser Barristan, and sing me a song on your way." Esser Barristan grinned as he left. "Your Grace." Hisdar zo Lorak made another proposal for the fighting pits as Daenerys sat on the throne. All men must die, but not all of them can die in glory. Glory? She inquired. Why else do men fight? Why did your ancestors cross the narrow sea and conquer the 7 kingdoms? Hisdar asked. Those who find victory in the fighting pits will never become kings, but their names will live on. It's the best chance they'll ever have. Is that what you used to tell men before you set them on butchering each other for sport? She wondered. Your Grace, today is the traditional beginning of the fighting season. I understand you have done much to keep the people of this city occupied, but that alone is not enough to hold this city, your city, together. Traditions can do that as well. Without them, former slaves and former masters have nothing in common. Nothing but centuries of mistrust and resentment. I can't promise this is the answer to all our problems, but it's a start. Deep within the city, in a small little plaza, dealers sold their wares, spices, and meals to some guests, while chefs made stew outside a little inn and some second sons sat at a table outside a brothel and enjoyed wine and woman. A shrouded man could be seen eating soup at a table, but he was just minding his own business, as was everyone else. A masked harpy seized one of the sellswords from behind while he was playing with one of the women. He raised his dagger to sever his throat, but it was caught. The masked man looked up to discover a shrouded figure on his wrist, and the cloaked figure lifted his hood to expose himself to be Naruto. He had purposefully hidden there to await this exact time. You know, that's not very nice, Naruto said as he broke the man's wrist and slammed him face first into the table before tossing the knife at the harpy who was attempting to kill the other sellsword at the table. It slashed the man across the stomach with his sword after hitting him in the arm. Naruto spun around, removing his cloak and whipping it into the face of the third harpy in the plaza before tying it around his neck and hurling him face first against a wall. The fourth harpy's son lunged at him, only for Naruto to shove his arm away, kick out his leg, and then knee him in the face so hard that the man's mask broke. Everyone in the square was taken aback by Naruto's unexpected display of martial talent as he cracked his neck before glancing at the 2 second sons. Stay here and tie them up. Call an unsullied squad here to secure them for questioning for her grace. As Naruto proceeded into a door that led to a tiny passageway with other doors, the 2 sellswords nodded. He took a few steps till he was in the center of the passage before blowing a shrill whistle. Come out, whatever you're doing, I know you're there, he whispered in low Valyrian. He became rather proficient in the language. I already took out 4 of your friends, and I'm happy to take out more. After he stated that, 10 masked sons of the harpy emerged from the side doors in front of him, followed by 10 more from behind him. He was surrounded by 24 harpies, all of them were equipped with knives or swords. He recognized this scene from the episode since it was the scene in which Grey Worm was brutally injured and Esser Barristan was slain while attempting to defend him. Suffice it to say, things were about to change. Huh, only 24. You should have brought more, he remarked before extending his right arm out, palm facing his left and right arm pointing down. It was a modified Wing Chun posture, similar to Naruto's main hand-to-hand combat style. He then motioned for them to attack him. 2. Naruto grabbed his arm and twisted his wrist before sweeping out one of his legs and kneeing him across the face. Naruto whirled and parried a sword to the back of the man's back before breaking his arm and flinging him to the ground. He used a spin kick to knock down 2 more men before turning around and kicking a third back. He hit one man in the face and avoided a sword cut to the head before avoiding another frontal sword attack and punching the man in the throat. He hit a guy on his right with a back fist before ducking another sword cut from the front and slamming the man in the throat again. Naruto evaded a stab from his left and grabbed his arms before slamming him against a wall. He disarmed him and knocked him down with a left and right punch to the face, a left jab to the throat, and a last right elbow to the side of his head. Another harpy charged at him, brandishing a spear, which he caught and hurled to the side before hitting another harpy in the face. He then deflected his opponent's arm and parried his sword to the side before hitting a jab to the nose and kicking another guy back before dragging the man's arm onto his knee and breaking it. He tossed the man's blade to the side before using it to block a strike to his left, slice his adversary across both legs, and knee him in the face. He hurled the sword down the hallway, the pommel striking one of the harpies in the face. Naruto ducked, evaded, blocked, and parried 12 harpies' strikes. Even the strongest swordsmen and fighters in Essos or Westeros couldn't pull off such a feat, but Naruto did it with ease. Fighting all these individuals at his utmost speed was like fighting a gigantic slug that was still moving at its usual speed. He knew what was coming and wasn't frightened about the fact that they were all armed. A harpy charged at him from the side, but he parried the sword to the side, drew him forward, and then threw him over his hip to the ground before kicking him across the face. One charged at him from the front, but he threw his knife away, struck him in the throat, and kicked out his legs, knocking him to the ground. He deflected a sword from another, hit him in the jaw, and drew him closer into his outstretched arm. The harpy landed on his back after hitting the clothesline. Another came at him from the right, so he kicked him in the crotch before lariating him and spinning into a low leg sweep to knock two harpies onto their backs. One hurriedly attempted to get back up, only to have Naruto run forward and knee him across the face. Another attacked him from behind with a sword, but Naruto pivoted and batted the blade off aim before delivering a push kick to his stomach.
The harpy attempted another lunge, but Naruto just grabbed his arm, yanked him forward, and struck an elbow to the back of his skull, knocking him out.
Another harpy lunged at him with a knife, but he parried it to the side and landed a palm blow to his jaw before doing 12 rapid chain punches to his chest and then kneeing him in the jaw with a low kick. He deflected another sword and struck the man in the throat with a backfist, followed by a palm punch to the man's jaw, before yanking him forward and dumping him to the ground. Naruto charged forward and unleashed a hard push kick, knocking one harpy into two others, before parrying a knife and elbowing that harpy across the face, then hitting a low kick to the back of his knees, knocking him off his feet. He then delivered a tremendous left straight blow to the face of a harpy, knocking him out. It was powerful enough to smash his nose as well as the mask. He deflected a sword to the side and landed a jab to the stomach, a punch to the face, and 3 quick chain punches to the chest before grasping his head and striking his neck with an elbow strike. Another harpy charged at him from behind, but he grabbed his arm and struck him in the jaw with his palm. He then pulled him into the air and landed a side kick to the chest, sending him crashing against the wall. By this point, 14 harpies had been knocked unconscious or were in too much pain to continue fighting, so the surviving 10 were becoming concerned. They were all wearing masks, but the shaking, stumbles, and glances at one another, combined with the delay in their steps, gave Naruto his answer that they were afraid. Before drawing his reverse blade katana, he reached up and grabbed the handle. My turn. Naruto sidestepped his sword swipe and smacked him in the stomach with his pommel, causing him to fall to his knees. Naruto whirled around and swung his sword high, stopping just before it struck the harpy in the face, so he could kick him in the chest and knock him back. When another guy charged, he turned around and stabbed him in the stomach with the sword. The harpy collapsed to the ground, clutching his stomach in agony, a couple ribs likely bruised or cracked. Naruto drew his katana to his side and took a few steps forward as the harpies panicked before attacking. He swung, striking one harpy in the breast before swinging to the right and striking another in the side. He punched him in the stomach, then the back of the shoulders, before spinning into a low sweep and hitting him in both legs. When one of the harpies came down at him, he deflected and swept his legs out from beneath him before striking him in the neck with his sword. When a harpy jumped at Naruto, he grabbed his neck in anguish and dodged another blade, hitting him in the back and then across the face. Naruto smacked him 4 times in the head, shoulder, chest, and stomach before flipping him into the ground in agony with a last blow to the back. He observed the remaining 4 harpies dash to the side doors and entrances they came through and slid to a stop with his sword stretched out. He then rose up and slid his sword back into its scabbard, and the instant it was sheathed, all 4 harpies collapsed to the ground in excruciating pain from fractured bones and other injuries. It felt like something out of an anime. When he heard the sound of boots and shields advancing, Naruto whispered to himself, "Cross this off the bucket list." Esser Barristan dashed in with a group of the Unsullied. "I was wondering when you guys would show up." The commander of the Unsullied and Queensguard gazed around at the 20 sons of the Harpy on the ground. Some were groaning in pain, but the majority were not. There were no evident pools of blood on the ground, thus they weren't dead. They were all armed with swords or knives, yet Naruto had not a single scratch or speck of sweat on him. Esser Barristan whispered, "By the 7, you took all of them on your own?" "Yeah, it was good practice, and I got to see how well my sword worked." Naruto unsheathed his blade and turned to strike a harpy across the face. He had climbed back up just to be knocked out again by Naruto. And it works flawlessly. Esser Barristan was still stunned as he sheathed his sword again. Fighting 4, 5, or even 6 men alone was not out of the question for the greatest fighters and swordsmen in Essos and Westeros. Esser Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning and one of Westeros' greatest swordsmen, came to mind, and Esser Barristan was confident he could accomplish it, although taking on 24 without a scratch was an astounding feat. When he remembered something Naruto had said, he peered around the room. Is this where? Esser Barristan understood he was standing in the spot where he should have perished when Naruto replied, yeah. It happened here. Several Unsullied would be killed, and Grey Worm would be seriously injured, but that hasn't happened, and Daenerys now has 24 harpies to question. I'm sure at least one of them will say something. Right, Esser Barristan said, signaling the Unsullied to begin rounding up the harpies while one went to obtain more assistance. Thank you, Naruto. Thank you. Naruto offered him a little bow and said, my pleasure. Now, if I'm no longer needed, I could use something to eat. Fighting always makes me hungry. After a few hours, Daenerys was in her council chamber, discussing the latest developments with her closest confidants and advisors. 24 sons of the Harpies attempted to murder several Second Sons members in the city and draw the Unsullied into a trap. Fortunately for them, Naruto dealt with the Harpies, saving the Unsullied from certain death, Grey Worm from terrible injury, and Esser Barristan from death. Dario still felt it was foolishness, but Naruto was correct about the attack in the city, which he prevented and dealt with on his own. When the war was ended and Naruto was victorious, Esser Barristan and the Unsullied arrived. The Harpies were taken to the dungeons and interrogated to find out what they knew, and while most resisted, one weak link in the chain revealed all. Furthermore, Naruto possessed something that Game of Thrones lacked. Truth Serum, also known as sodium pentothal. Most of the Harpies are disgruntled former slavers or nobles who lost control of the city when Daenerys invaded and took control. After she took power and the Unsullied began patrolling, they began meeting up in secret. Most of it was just hashing out their hatred for her until a few of them got in contact with the masters in Yunkai, Astapor, and Volantis. That's when they began to pick up and there was some truth serum in all of the captive Harpies, and they knew everything they did. When this is done, the masters provide them with weapons, resources, and the promise of their old power, and because this is their city, they know how to operate and how to get certain like-minded people to help, such as Vala. They used the sewers and former slave passageways beneath the city to move into position for their attack, Dario said to Daenerys, not wanting Naruto to overshadow him. They've been using those to get around the city and avoid being seen, as well as to gather and discuss their plans. It makes sense, because the Unsullied would be lost down there, and they mostly stick to the main roads and streets, Esser Barristan explained. But if we plan it right, we might be able to corner and trap all the Harpies down there. That could work. Thanks to our interrogation, we now know the names of the Harpies in the city. They used to hide behind masks, but now you know who they are, Naruto said Daenerys. This is good work, everyone. We've been on the defensive against the Sons of the Harpy, but now we have the knowledge to stop them. She told them, and everyone agreed. If you don't mind, Naruto, I'd like to speak with you for a moment. Sure. Naruto said as Esser Barristan, Missandei, and Grey Worm exited the room, leaving him, Dario, and Daenerys alone. Just Naruto, Daenerys murmured to Dario as he approached her. Are you sure about this? He inquired. I am. That's all, Dario, Daenerys said, and he nodded before departing. As he did so, he flashed Naruto a death gaze, to which he just responded without a care in the world. I'd be careful, Daenerys. Asking to speak to me in private may send the wrong message to your lover. He already doesn't like me, so if he thinks you've replaced him, he'll try to kill me, Naruto cautioned. And you're afraid of Dario? Daenerys inquired, only for Naruto to snort reflexively. Scared of him? He chuckled. So, you have a good sense of humor. I've met cats scarier than him, and one advantage of cats is that they're generally much better behaved when they want to be. I'll speak with him about it, Daenerys told him. It's fine, I can handle myself, Naruto assured her. It's not that. You've been assisting me in my endeavors, and I'll speak with Dario about his behavior, Daenerys vowed. All right if you think it'll help, but I don't think so. I know why he's this way with me. He's jealous, Naruto explained, giving her a puzzled look. He's afraid he'll lose favor with you now that I'm around. I understand. A new guy comes around and makes all these promises that he can't keep. I would be too. Men. You all want the same thing, she mumbled, shrugging. Should he be concerned about his position? Are you doing this just to get to my bedside? I'm flattered, Daenerys, and if things were different, I'd admit I'd be doing my best to win your favor, but... Naruto reflected lovingly about Linda. I have someone waiting for me when I get back home. She must be very special, Daenerys replied, and she could tell by his smile that she was. She is, he replied, and she grinned back. Well, even if your circumstances were different, I wouldn't fall for your attempts at flattery, she said, and he grinned before speeding away and then swiftly returning in front of her with a bunch of gorgeous flowers. I'm not sure about that. I can be quite charming when I want to be, he said before handing her the flowers. She tried her hardest to disguise her smile, but he could tell. So, what did you want to talk to me in private about? Daenerys placed the flowers on the table, saying, Ah, right. You've done a lot to help me, and I want to thank you again. Have things changed for the better? If you're wondering if things will get better in Meereen, I'm afraid time will be the ultimate answer. But you know more about the Harpies and how to take them out of the equation, so that's gonna be a tremendous help. Hopefully taking them out this soon will end the conflict so you can better help the city, he said. If you're asking if you've changed the future, I can't answer that because, as I said before, the future is constantly changing, so what I saw before may not happen now with everything we've done, and things could be better or worse, but I can't answer that. You are both helpful and vague at times, Daenerys said, to which he responded with a shrug. It comes with the territory. My powers are great, but even they have limits, and I think it's a fair one. If you knew how everything was going to happen, it would make life less worth living. Naruto stated. Sure, life has a lot of bad things happen, but it also has some good things that make it worth going through the bad. A rather naive point of view, Daenerys observed. Naruto corrected her, I'd like to think of it as more optimistic and hopeful. You are truly unique, aren't you? Daenerys remarked, and he merely smiled. That's probably the best description for me, Naruto remarked confidently. The following day, it was midday in Meereen, and everything were proceeding as normally as possible. More and more people were given good work and compensation for the several initiatives that Daenerys had implemented. That was a welcome distraction for many of the city's residents, who simply wanted to go about their business. The Sons of the Harpy, on the other hand, would not rest until Daenerys was dead and their great city was restored to its former glory. A group of roughly 30 people were going through the city's basement corridors in preparation for another attack. Their initial attempt had failed the day before, so they would have to try again. The black passages beneath the city were extensive, with only the torches they carried providing light. A powerful burst of wind came from behind them and extinguished all of their torches. The Harpies came to a halt when they saw streams of crimson and white lightning run about them, and their torches and weapons were snatched. The lightning quickly faded away, and a torch was lit in front of them, allowing them to see a strange man holding one. Naruto was there. Hello there. You know it's dangerous walking down here without enough lighting. You could get lost. Fortunately for you. Naruto moved his torch to his right and lighted the torch held by an unsullied soldier, who then ignited the torch next to him, and so on.
There were 20 Unsullied standing in front of them, shields and spears in hand, cutting them off from the front. They could hear marching and clanking from behind them at that point. More Unsullied marched in, cutting off their escape. The Harpies groped for their weapons, but they were nowhere to be seen. Naruto simply pointed his torch to the ground to show them how their weapons were heaped up. My new friends and I are here to help you get to safety.
Naruto couldn't take his shit-eating smile off his face. These Harpies were apprehended, and not only here. Similar raids were taking place throughout the city. They knew who a Harpy was and where to find them thanks to information obtained from the prisoners kidnapped. Dario led a party to the south, where he broke into a house and discovered 5 guys living together. They were taken away by the Unsullied as he removed a wooden floor panel to reveal multiple Harpy masks and weapons. So they were telling the truth, he said as he stuffed them into a bag and walked away with the Unsullied. Daenerys has just ended a meeting with the other Meereenese council members to discuss the status of their new initiatives. Despite the fact that the Harpies certified that no one on the council was a member, Daenerys held them at arm's length. Call it cautious, because their devotion to the change of Meereen was unquestionable at best. She was out on the balcony, sipping wine and watching the city go by. The Unsullied were on missions in Meereen to apprehend Sons of the Harpy members. If luck was on their side, they'd all be arrested shortly. Esser Barristan approached the balcony and cleared his throat to draw her attention. He informed her that Grey Worm, Dario, and Naruto have returned from their mission in the city, and she stepped back in to see them enter. I take it things went well? She inquired. Grey Worm said, Yes, Your Grace. Everything went off without a hitch, Dario continued. Naruto reassured her, No problem on my end. Overall, you've apprehended just under 200 Sons of the Harpies. 200? Is that all of them? She wondered. Esser Barristan replied, "Everyone that the people we took prisoner yesterday told us about. I'm sure if things had continued as they were for the Harpies, they would have recruited more, but we stopped them before that could happen." "Well, we'll find out sooner or later. We have a lot of Harpies to interrogate. Who knows what we'll find out," Dario chuckled. "That is, if Naruto is correct and the stuff he gave us works. It will work, but be careful with the dosage you give them. Too much will kill them," Naruto cautioned. He'd used his truth serum on the kidnapped Harpies he'd attacked, but he didn't have enough to give to Daenerys, and the consequences of leaving behind advanced medicine and psychiatric medications were something he couldn't ignore. So he went foraging and used old-school chemistry to create a barbiturate derivative from native plants and other known mixes and elixirs from the city. It wasn't as good as his pills and medicines, but it did the same job. At the very least, this solves your Harpy problem for this city. The masters in Volantis, Astapor, and Volantis remain a problem, and it won't be long before word of what happened reaches them. "What would you suggest?" Daenerys inquired. "Start doing your own spying. Set up a network that can give you some information on them, and unfortunately, at this point, you need more information to act further. Focus on Meereen first. You've taken care of some of your more serious problems, so that's something to be proud of." "All of you," Naruto said. "Well, except for Dario." Everyone laughed or smirked, save Dario, who sent him a look. "How about we go out to a training field and test your new sword?" he threatened. "As much as I'd like to show you how little you actually scare me." Naruto sent him a charming wink that enraged him even more. "I've got other things to take care of, and things in Meereen are going so well that I can go out." Esser Barristan inquired, "Where are you going?" "Back to Westeros. I want to double-check some things in King's Landing before heading to Castle Black. Cersei's going to start her power grab, and it won't be long before the High Sparrow shows up," Naruto explained. "Who exactly is Jon Snow?" Daenerys inquired. Esser Barristan addressed her as Ned Stark's bastard son. He didn't know the youngster, but he knew Ned Stark had a son named that. "Jon will be named Lord Commander of the Watch soon, and I need to talk to him. He's facing an enemy he can't fight alone, and I plan to interfere with the Boltons in the north for Sansa's sake," Naruto said as he stopped himself from leaving after remembering Maester Aemon was at Castle Black. "There is one more thing I should tell you before I leave, and it concerns the Castle Black Maester." "What do you think about it?" Daenerys questioned. "Believe it or not, if you know your family history, and Esser Barristan can vouch for me because he should as well, you have one living relative at Castle Black. He's the Maester there, Aemon Targaryen. He's the second son of King Maekar and brother to Aerion and Aegon V." Naruto explained, and Daenerys took a moment to process that. "From what I've heard, he was the second son who chose to forego his inheritance rights by joining the Citadel as a Maester," Barristan explained, and Naruto nodded. "When Aerion died, Aemon couldn't inherit because he was a Maester, so it was passed to Aegon the Unlikely, the third son who became king, your grandfather. So, technically you have a great-grand-uncle in Westeros. Because of his vow to the Citadel and the Night's Watch, he had no inheritance rights and has been there since. He's old and blind but he's still alive now," Naruto informed her. She discovered she had a relative in Westeros who had been alive all this time but, as Esser Barristan and Naruto explained, was just a Targaryen in history as he had become a Maester. "If you want to write him a letter, you can give it to me and I'll deliver it to him." Daenerys was still stunned, but she snapped out of it as Missandei touched her shoulder. "Your Grace? Forgive me. Give me a moment, and I'll write the letter," Daenerys stated as she stood up and walked over to a table before returning her gaze to Naruto. "Thank you." "My pleasure," Naruto responded with a smile as he spotted Dario's glare, which he disregarded. Daenerys sat at a table to write the letter, giving her some solitude. When Esser Barristan arrived, Naruto strolled out onto the balcony to survey the city. "I can see why she likes coming out here. It's a beautiful view," Naruto replied. Esser Barristan agreed, "It is. However, I'm afraid the view from King's Landing may not be as spectacular to enjoy." "Because of the Lannisters or the smell?" Naruto questioned, and Esser Barristan laughed. "I've heard that you can smell piss and shit from miles away." "I can vouch for that. I spent the majority of my life there," Esser Barristan said. "And yet, in all that time, no one thought of a better plumbing system?" Naruto inquired, to which Esser Barristan simply shrugged. "Perhaps you can help fix it. Lesser minds have tried and failed," Esser Barristan said. "Well, maybe that's the problem. Lesser minds have been trying to solve the problem when it really only takes a great mind," Naruto joked. Esser Barristan had only known the young man for a short time, yet there was something about him that reminded him of speaking and mingling with old acquaintances from long ago. Here was this young guy with incredible force and talent, but also with a feeling of honor and duty that would undoubtedly make him a true knight about whom small folk would sing poems. He was one of a kind. Keep an eye on things here. We may have dealt with the harpies, but don't act as if the problems have been resolved. As they were about to walk back inside, Esser Barristan assured him, I'll keep her safe. Naruto remembered something. Oh, and if you see Esser Jorah or Tyrion Lannister come by, trust them, Naruto said. Wait, what? Esser Barristan inquired as they returned inside. Daenerys used a wax seal to seal her letter and delivered it to Naruto. Please tell him. I wish I could have met him, she added, nodding. I'll make sure he gets the message, Naruto said as he took out a pill-like device that was a small beacon finder and synced it to his watch. Here you go, take this. What is it? Daenerys said, inspecting it before passing it to Esser Barristan. Think of it as a way to notify me if something goes wrong. If you ever need assistance or an emergency arises, press that and I'll know to return, Naruto explained. Esser Barristan pressed the strange device, which began blinking a blue light and making Naruto's watch beep. See? I know it's you, and I'll be back here as soon as I can. I'll be in Westeros, so I won't always know when you'll need me. This way, I know. He winked at them all before heading to the entrance, and the Unsullied moved out of his way. He smiled as he turned to face the group. I'll be right back. Naruto flashed with lightning before fleeing the room in a gust of wind. Daenerys and the others dashed to the window, where they witnessed a trail of lightning depart the city at breakneck speed. Amazing. XXXXX line break. The town of King's Landing. Naruto came in flea bottom after a lengthy journey over Essos in the narrow sea. When he came to a halt, he immediately gagged and covered his nose and mouth to protect himself from the strong odor of shit and pee. Ah god, I think I'm going to puke, Naruto said, fighting the temptation to vomit right there. Man, when they tell you that this city stinks like shit and piss, they're not kidding. He moved rapidly past the people on the street who glanced at him in astonishment due to his appearance and apparel. He made his way out of the little lane he had arrived into the larger streets, but the smell of urine and shit lingered, so he kept traveling till he came upon a bread shop. He came to a halt, and the aroma of freshly baked bread and meals provided a nice respite from the awful stink he had to contend with. Oh, God. How do people live like this? He said, his attention drawn to the aroma of a bakery. A part of him wondered how he would survive in this metropolis, but that notion vanished as he heard shouting nearby and ran over to see what was going on. He followed the screams down a few alleyways until he reached an open street and found a dozen men with shaved heads and 7 pointed stars etched on their foreheads. They wore black robes with iron chains and armed themselves with clubs or bludgeoning-like weapons. The men began destroying barrels of wine and mead at a nearby tavern and assaulted others who tried to stop them. Naruto recognized this scene from the show as the point at when Cersei provided the High Sparrow with the legitimacy he required, reuniting the faith militant. Naruto had nothing against anyone's right to follow their religion or believe in anything as long as it did not harm others. And what the High Sparrow had his troops do was not the actions of a heavenly servant. It was the conduct of a psychopath, and it was time to take him down a notch.
Hey, when one of the sparrows turned around, a pebble smacked him in the face.
When Naruto closed the distance and kicked him in the chest, knocking him over a table, he stumbled back in pain and held his broken nose. He then booted another sparrow and quickly backstepped another's club attack before grasping his arm. He jolted him around a little before throwing him to the ground and breaking his arm on his knee. Naruto immediately grabbed the sparrow's club and stopped a strike at the back of his head before sweeping out one of his legs, causing the guy to fall to his knees. Naruto smacked him across the face, cracking his nose or breaking his jaw. He flung the club at a sparrow exiting the inn before unsheathing his blade and plunging it into the stomach of another sparrow attempting to rush him from behind. Naruto then kicked his foot out and struck him on the side of the head with his pommel before blocking 3 wild club blows from another sparrow. He parried the third block to the side and booted him back before bringing his sword down on the man's head. Naruto slashed the man across the face with his blade, knocking him out and knocking out several of his teeth. When he looked around and saw that all of the sparrows had been dealt with, he sheathed his sword and walked over to the one who was still conscious. He drew him up by his robe so the sparrow could get a good look at his face. Tell your High Sparrow that he doesn't fool me. If he thinks he speaks for the gods, tell him. Naruto raised his palm and began vibrating it at super speed to generate lightning before his eyes began to flame red. He does not. Naruto vibrated his vocal cords at the end to make it even more scary before punching the sparrow in the face. He then flew around the area in a flash of lightning, and when he came to a halt, all of the sparrows were bound by the chains on their robes, and their weapons were broken to pieces. Naruto saw he had caught some attention, which was not how he had planned to make his grand entrance to King's Landing, the Lannisters, or the Tyrells, but when life offers you lemons, you create lemonade. He dug inside his pack and pulled out a gold coin, which he tossed to the tavern owner. "For the damages," Naruto said, and the owner nodded in answer. He and the others were still reeling from what they had witnessed, and they had no idea what had happened. Naruto then began to walk away when his body flashed with lightning and he bolted, kicking up a massive plume of earth and a whirlwind of air that brushed past people. A rapid lightning blur raced through the city in the blink of an eye, leaving only the small shockwaves of air that brushed by people and the trail of lightning that could be seen as evidence. Naruto didn't remember the plans and layouts of King's Landing, but a fast gallop across the city gave him a vague understanding. As he hurried across the city, he noticed more sparrows causing a commotion. Some were demolishing other bars that sold alcohol, while others were destroying the merchandise of traders who were opposed to the faith or practiced other religions. The city watch did nothing, just like in the show, but Naruto did. He knocked them out and then chained them up before going on to the next batch. The show didn't go into great depth about how many sparrows there were. They were in their hundreds, if not thousands, all across the city. An ordinary group would have needed hours, if not days, to get them all, but Naruto did it in minutes, and when he was finished, all the sparrows were trussed up like turkeys ready to roast. His final trip was at Littlefinger's brothel, where he witnessed some of the sparrows pulling men and women out. He approached one of the sparrows who was hitting one of the women and grabbed his arm before yanking him off and slamming him 3 times face first into the wall.
He ducked a club strike to the head, grabbed the sparrow's arm, drew him in, kneed him in the groin, then elbowed him in the back of the neck. He threw a tornado kick on a sparrow who tried to assault him from behind, knocking him to the ground with a leg sweep and hitting him in the face with 12 quick chain punches before a final back fist to the jaw. His kick struck the sparrow in the side of the head, knocking him unconscious.
Naruto noticed that the women the sparrows had just attacked were shivering in terror of what had transpired. "Go. Find somewhere safe," he said, and they nodded before he entered. He strode by and elbowed a sparrow in the face before snatching his robe and tossing him head first into a table. When a sparrow attacked him from the left, he just parried his club to the side, grabbed his arm, and pulled him into a clinch, kneeing him 4 times in the chest before pulling him to the ground and breaking his arm. He elbowed him in the back of the skull for good measure before twisting on the ground and leg sweeping another sparrow before axe kicking him in the head. When another lunged at him from behind, he just sidestepped his club and uppercut him in the nose. Naruto stomped on the sparrow's ankle, breaking it and causing the man to cry in agony before kicking him in the skull. Another sparrow swung his club at him, but he grabbed his arm, snatched the club, whacked him across the face with it, then swung it down into his head and kicked him against the wall. He tossed the club down and continued walking. Naruto walked past their bodies and up the stairs after throwing 2 sparrows through a door. A sparrow charged down the stairs at him, but Naruto hit him in the throat and shoved him to the side, where he slid and fell. When he reached the top, he fired a spinning back kick into the stomach of a sparrow before grabbed him by the neck and flinging him into a table.
To dodge a club swing, he bent down and elbowed the sparrow in the stomach, struck him in the groin, and slammed him headfirst onto the floor. He then jumped forward and swung a flying lariat at another sparrow, striking him in the throat and stomping on his stomach for good measure. When he noticed another sparrow approaching him, he just kicked him in the chest and then landed a wall leap punch to his face. When he heard voices from one of the rooms, he unsheathed his sword and dashed away. He came to a halt in a vast room, sheathed his sword, and looked around. 5 sparrows were on the ground in agony, either with shattered limbs or faces, while 2 old nude men cowered on their knees. Naruto moved over to one of the sparrows who managed to lean up, and simply booted him in the face. "Thank you," one of the men begged, reaching out to shake Naruto's hand, but Naruto backed back. No offense, but considering what you were doing in here, I'd rather not touch you," he pointed out, and the man agreed. "Get yourselves cleaned up." "Thank you," the men said as Naruto went to go but was stopped by the 2 men. "And FYI,
The only reason I intervened was because they were about to kill you, but they had a point. Settle down because two old men like yourselves at a brothel is just creepy, Naruto said as he went out and passed Olivar, the male prostitute who worked for Littlefinger. He's the one who spied on Loras and revealed the Tyrell plans for Sansa, allowing Tywin to seize her. He also worked for Littlefinger and hence couldn't be trusted. Naruto unsheathed his sword and struck him in the gut, breaking a few ribs, before striking him across the face, breaking his nose. What was that for? Olivar said, his nose gushing profusely. Karma, you work for Littlefinger, Naruto said as he sheathed his blade and walked away. Loras Tyrell was sparring and winning against his opponent in a private training yard near the Red Keep. He deflected his opponent's sword with a shield bash to the face and knocked him to the ground. He took off his helmet, and his servant took his sword and shield before presenting him with a cup of water. That's when he observed 12 men in black robes approaching him in the training yard. He turned to go, but they caught him and restrained him. What are you doing? Get your hands off me, Loras screamed, but they grabbed him. Lancel Lannister approached Loras, fully committing to the Sparrows and the Faith Melita. You have broken the laws of gods and men, Esser Loras of House Tyrell. Loras questioned, who do you think you are? Lancel answered, justice.
More cruel vengeance, bigotry, and stupidity, if you ask me. They heard this and turned to find a strange man seated off to the side. He was seated on a boulder, sipping water from a jug and holding an apple in the other hand. I mean, you work for a zealot who despises the wealthy and powerful and is using his faith to mask that, so it's not actual justice. Only a truly pious and self-righteous nutcase would use religion to harm innocent people.
Be careful how you speak, blasphemer, one of the Sparrows advised, only for Naruto to set down the jug and rise up. He walked over and bit into the apple. I'm sorry, but it's the truth, Naruto said. I understand that you believe what you believe, but blindly following your faith and using it as an excuse to hurt people is where I draw the line. I mean, sure, Loras is a bit arrogant and spoiled considering his upbringing and family wealth, and he could be partially blamed for inciting the War of the Five Kings by filling Renly Baratheon's head with all these talks of being king, which led to his own downfall. Loras glanced at Naruto, perplexed, not knowing who he is or where he came from, but happy that he came to his rescue. But, other than that, Loras isn't that bad. At least he's not out there killing innocent people like the Mountain or the Lannisters have done. I mean, Cersei herself is a monster. You would know, Brother Lancel. You slept with her, didn't you? Naruto said, taking a bite of his apple as Loras and the other men in the training area looked at Lancel. You go after Loras for loving men when you end up screwing your cousin. That's a bit hypocritical, isn't it? You go after Loras for loving men when you end up screwing your cousin. That's a bit hypocritical, isn't it? Seize him, Lancel said, as one of the Sparrows approached to grab him. Naruto just swung his hands to the side, kicked one of his legs out, and kneed him in the jaw. The Sparrow groaned in pain before Naruto pushed him down and he slumped down. That made the other Sparrows nervous as they prepared their weapons, while Naruto stood there carefree. Did you really think that would work? Naruto asked before flinging the apple high into the air. Naruto knocked one of the Sparrow's arms to the side, punched him in the face, spun around his back, and elbowed him in the back of the head, knocking him out. He ducked a club in the Sparrow's face and kneed him in the stomach before throwing him to the ground and stomping on his ankle. He ducked another club and hit the Sparrow in the stomach before approaching him from behind and punching him in the back of the skull. He wrestled the Sparrow to the ground before grabbing his arm and bringing his knee forward, breaking it at the elbow. He kicked another Sparrow in the knee before grasping his shoulder and cracking his collarbone with an elbow strike. He slipped beneath another club and fell back to escape a spiked mace to the face before blocking the Sparrow's arm and knocking the other Sparrow aside. He threw the Sparrow to the ground and kneed him in the face before delivering a spinning roundhouse kick on the Sparrow behind him and dropping into a leg sweep that tripped two Sparrows. Naruto rose to his feet and backflipped, landing on the Sparrows' tummies, knees first, before elbowing them in the face. He rolled forward and unsheathed his sword, slamming it into the knee of one Sparrow, breaking his leg, and then breaking his nose with a pommel stroke before turning around and slashing 3 Sparrows across the face. He then smacked them all over their body, and they crumpled to the ground as Naruto moved over to the final Sparrow, Lancel. Lancel calmed down and swung his club, only for Naruto to casually knock it out of his hands before smacking him in the back of the leg, causing him to fall to his knees. He then began lightly whacking him all over from head to knees to tamper with him. Lancel cowered and hid his head as Naruto continued to smack him all around, which was very amusing.
He came to a halt around the 20th hit, and Lancel still cowered before looking up at Naruto, who had a playful grin on his face. Naruto then struck him across the face with his sword, knocking out a tooth and breaking his nose before sheathing his blade and extending his hand. His apple fell back into his hand, and he took a bite before looking around at all the sparrows who were in pain or had been knocked unconscious.
You know, for being the Faith's militia, you aren't exactly that well trained, are you? Naruto mentioned this before staring at Loris. Thank you, sir. Loris addressed him. Ah, don't mention it, and I'm not a sir. Naruto took another meal before approaching Lancel and poking him in the side, causing him to look at him. Explain to your High Sparrow what happened today. And tell him to come down from his ego trip. He needs to face reality.
He then kicked him in the face, knocking him unconscious. Naruto chewed into his apple again before tossing it over his shoulder and hitting a sparrow in the head. Who exactly are you? Loris inquired. A good friend. Naruto responded. If I were you, I'd stay within the walls of the Red Keeps and keep your sword on you.
Naruto then began to walk away, followed by Loris and the other men in attendance in the training yard. I must repay you, sir. My sister is the reigning monarch. Allow me to lead you to her, and she will reward you. Loris proposed. I don't require a reward. I did what I did because it was the correct thing to do, no matter how difficult it may appear. However, if you are offering a prize, I would like something to eat. Naruto brought this up. Of course, she says. Come with me. Loris escorted Naruto to the Red Keep. Many of the city watch and guards tried to stop him, but Loris vouched for him, and that was enough to allow him through. This was not as he had planned it, but he had to go with the flow. He finally had a means to meet with another queen, and hoped Marjorie wouldn't toss him in jail like Daenerys.
Loris had him wait in a room while attendants and servants went to bring him a feast.
Loris had the best food prepared in the kitchen delivered to him, and the Red Keep guards, together with some troops from House Tyrell, would keep an eye on him until he returned. Loris went to tell his sister what had happened, and she went to face Tommen. She came into his apartments while the Kingsguard stood at attention at his door. She entered his room and marched over to him while he was eating at a table. Why was my brother almost arrested and put in a cell? Marjorie begged to know, only to have Tommen gaze at her puzzled. I'm sorry, I don't know. He merely asked for her to give him a look. Is Loris all right? He's all right now. Someone came to his help, and he immediately returned to the keep. She told him, but she didn't say who his savior was. Marjorie, I didn't order his arrest. Tommen comforted her. We both know who it was. You said she was going back to Castle Rock. Marjorie reminded him, and Tommen rose from his seat. Are you saying my mother is involved? She's envious that you're no longer hers. Her vengeance is attempting to arrest my brother. Marjorie informed him. Aren't you and your mother getting along? Tommen was perplexed. He was still entirely oblivious to the major political chess match going on right in front of his eyes. Marjorie simply puffed in frustration and put on her best innocent and forlorn face. Oh, my dear, dear king. Do you have any feelings for me? She inquired of him. Of course I do, I say. You are queen. Tommen reminded her of this. I can't bear the thought of my brother being imprisoned in some filthy cell. If it hadn't been for a friend's courageous efforts, I can't even imagine what I would do. Marjorie said to him, putting on her best show and even cracking her voice a little to sell it. I'll take care of it. I'll make certain that the individuals who attempted to arrest him are dealt with. Do you make a promise? She inquired, and he nodded before departing to confront his mother. When he entered her chambers, he noticed her looking out a window with a cup of wine in her hand. I want the men who tried to arrest Sir Loris right now. I want them chained. Do I appear to have anyone with me? Cersei inquired of her son. Well, no, he stumbled. However, you armed the Faith militant. You gave the High Sparrow an army, and he tried to arrest Sir Loris. I did. And your wife is perfectly entitled to criticize. We cannot allow fanatics to detain the Queen's brother, regardless of his perversions, Cersei informed him. Then you'll hand over the men who attempted to arrest him? Tommen inquired. I told you I didn't have them. You are king. If you speak to the High Sparrow, I'm sure he'll hand them over. Cersei informed him, and Tommen nodded before proceeding to the door. Wait a second, my son. I have a question. How did Sir Loris avoid capture? I'm not sure. Someone, according to Marjorie, assisted him. He responded before leaving Cersei with a lot to think about. Tommen attempted to enter the Sept of Baelor to talk with the High Sparrow, but was halted by a group of sparrows who refused to let him in. The High Sparrow was praying, and they stated he didn't want to be disturbed, so no one could enter, not even the king. One of the Kingsguard offered to clear out the sparrows and slaughter them all, but Tommen thought that was going too far. Then, as a gathering crowd of peasants and small folk gathered against him, calling him a bastard of sin and using all the appropriate expletives from reports about his birth and who his father actually was, Tommen was too much a coward to return to the Red Keep. He went back to his chamber to speak with Marjorie. "My queen?" he shouted out, and she returned from the balcony. "There was no way to arrest the men who attempted to take your brother without resorting to violence. You are the king of the Andals, lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and protector of the land. And you let a horde of zealots take charge," Marjorie informed him. "I'm going to speak with the High Sparrow," he made a pledge. "Are you sure? When?" He didn't have an answer when she inquired. I'm sorry, I don't know." "You don't know?" He was just praying now. As a result of what he stated, she resolved to take action on her own. "I have to send word to my grandmother." Marjorie stepped out of the room, past him. "Will you come back later?" he inquired. "I need to be with my family, Your Grace," she told him and then walked away. She was on her way to write a letter to her grandma when she decided to pay a visit to the guy who had saved her brother. "He might be able to help you." Loras was in the room he had made up for Naruto with several of House Tyrell's maids in attendance, as well as some of their house security. The lavish lunch was all you'd expect from a royal family meal. An entire table was laden with the finest fruits, breads, roasted vegetables, game meats and premium cuts, as well as the greatest sweets and wines. The food on the table could have fed 20 people, but Naruto ate it all in one sitting. It was a spectacular sight, albeit a little unsettling for the stomach. Naruto drank a cup of water before wiping his mouth with a napkin and felt completely restored. "Thank you once more for the supper, it was quite tasty," Naruto addressed Loras. "You are most welcome. How did you consume all of this? I've never seen a man twice your size consume this much. This was probably enough food for 20 people." Loras brought this up. "I burn a lot of energy." As the servants began to clean up, Naruto stood up from his chair and placed the napkin on the table. "That must be a lot of energy you can burn if you eat that much." When he heard that, Marjorie Tyrell, Loras's brother and Queen of Westeros, entered. Of course, Naruto knew her, and like everyone else he had encountered on this planet, Marjorie resembled Natalie Dormer, the actress who played her on the show and was conveniently the third woman on Naruto's freebie list. He had met all three of them, which threw him for a loop. Marjorie, like Daenerys and Missandei, was stunning. She was dressed in a stunning silver, green, and gold gown that fell to the ground and featured a deep V-cut to reveal some cleavage and a highly intricate gold necklace around her neck. Her brown hair was thick and softly curled, and her eyes were huge. A slim but ladylike physique with flawless, undamaged pale skin and a beautiful smile that has likely deceived and twisted many men. If Naruto had a lower moral compass and a higher perversion, he would be swooning over her and plotting a method to be by her bedside, but he possessed more tact and restraint. "Is this the same friend who came to your aid, Loras?" "He is. This is." Loras was about to introduce him when he realized he didn't know what his name was. "Please forgive me, but I don't even know what your name is." "Please allow me to correct that." Naruto took a dramatic bow, which was more humorous than impolite. "Namikaze, Naruto Uzumaki. I am a wandering doctor, engineer, warrior, swordman, speedster, and God's champion at your service." His behavior and name were strange, but so was the vast list of occupations he held with his name. "May I apologize? Are you the God's champion?" Loras sought clarification. "Yes. You didn't think I showed up to your training yard just as the sparrows were going to attack you by chance, did you?"
"I had a feeling it was going to happen. Please allow me to explain." And Naruto began telling his updated origin narrative for this world, replete with lightning bolt, coma, and visions that provided him full background information on many characters, including Loras and Marjorie. His knowledge of their prior events, particularly those that occurred in private or without the presence of other witnesses, began to lend credibility to his account and claim.
"Well, Naruto, that's quite a fascinating story you've crafted for us, but please don't take my next question personally. I'm afraid we find it difficult to believe you are who you say you are and that you have been favored by the gods," Marjorie informed him. "No offense meant, Your Grace," Naruto comforted her. "Believe me, You're not the only individual I've encountered who has questioned my assertion, but unlike the previous time, I believed a more subtle approach would be more acceptable. My most recent attempt to prove my claim resulted in me spending the night in a cell after I used my talents. Now, thank you once again for the lunch, but I suppose I've taken up enough of your time, so if you would accompany me to the Red Keep's gate, I can show you more proof of what I can do. Naruto took his pack and walked out of the room, followed by Loras and Marjorie, as well as other House Tyrell guards just in case. They strolled through the Red Keep, giving Naruto a close-up look at something he knew every fan on the planet would want to see for themselves. Only this was not a set from a TV show. They ultimately arrived at the Red Keep's gates, which were unlocked by the City Watch as Naruto walked out but turned around. Thank you once again for your assistance, Loras informed him. It's my joy. If I were you, I'd hide within the walls of the Red Keep and send word for reinforcements to keep you two safe, Naruto informed them. And what will you be doing? Marjorie was perplexed. As I have stated, I will be in the city. There's still some work to be done, and the Faith Militant aren't going away anytime soon, so I'll be acting as a stumbling block. Something I suppose the king is hesitant to do. Unfortunately for the Sparrows, I'm not someone who hesitates to do the right thing. And I don't have to worry about public outrage or political rulings, which is an added plus. Naruto replied before saluting them with 2 fingers. Find me in the city once you're ready to talk again. Crimson and white lightning flashed throughout Naruto's body from head to toe, and his eyes began to flash with electricity as he flew away at superhuman speed. As Marjorie and the others felt the blast of wind blow past them, he kicked up a big plume of dust and dirt and caused a small sonic boom. That's not possible. Loras grumbled, having seen it but still not believing it. He was telling the whole truth. Marjorie replied, realizing that their new companion could be the greatest blessing to House Tyrell in years. And if everything he said is true, he's someone we should keep in contact with. To be continued.
That's it for this podcast and for listening to this video. I hope you enjoyed this part of the story, and if you did, like, share, subscribe for more, and thank you all for help and support, and have a great day.